Sir, if you don't have an ID, you don't fly. It's that simple.
A laugh followed. Not loud, but sharp enough to turn heads. Someone behind the podium muttered something about people thinking rules didn't apply to them. Then the line stalled, eyes pressing in, judgment thick in the air. But the man standing there didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice, didn't beg. Because minutes later, a red phone behind the checkpoint would ring, and everything would change. By the way, where you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. What no one in that line understood was that this wasn't about paperwork. It wasn't even about authority. It was about how quickly dignity can be stripped when power thinks it's being challenged, and how dangerous it is to mistake calm for weakness. And the single dad adjusted his grip on the small backpack at his feet and looked down at his daughter. She clutched the strap of her stuffed rabbit, eyes wide, sensing tension without understanding it. He bent slightly, murmured reassurance, then straightened again, expression steady. The TSA supervisor didn't see that moment. She saw only a man out of place, holding up her line, forcing her to assert control. He finally spoke, voice level. He explained the missing ID, the theft report, the alternatives he'd already offered. Each word was measured, precise, like he'd learned long ago that panic only feeds the wrong people. The supervisor waved it away. Procedures were procedures. The crowd mattered more than explanations. Evan Calder stood there, shoulders relaxed, boots scuffed, jacket worn thin at the elbows. He didn't look like someone worth listening to. He looked like someone to manage. When the supervisor motioned him aside, it wasn't discreet. It was deliberate. A public correction meant to remind everyone who decided who moved and who waited. He stepped where she pointed, not out of compliance, but calculation. The space near the secondary screening area hummed differently. The pitch of the scanners, the rhythm of the conveyor belts, the slight delay between beeps. Most people tuned it out. He didn't. His eyes tracked the monitors overhead, the way a few screens refreshed half a second slower than the rest. Another chuckle drifted from the line. Someone whispered that he should have just followed the rules. The supervisor's lips curled, satisfied, control restored. Or so she thought. His daughter shifted closer, fingers brushing his hand, and the medical tag clipped to her sleeve caught the light. He felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the instinct to shield, to move, to solve whatever obstacle stood between her and safety. Missing this flight wasn't an inconvenience. It was a risk. Appointments waited on the other end. Stability depended on timing. Just a few more minutes, he told her softly, even as his gaze returned to the systems above. A scanner chirped, then chirped again. Wrong interval, a small thing, easy to miss. Except patterns never lied. The supervisor called for an officer, her tone sharp, efficient. She was good at this, at asserting order, at flattening friction with policy. She didn't notice the flicker of concern crossing an officer's face as another lane slowed. Then another. She didn't notice Evan's attention narrow, at the way his posture subtly changed, like someone stepping onto familiar ground. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded paper, not an ID, but a maintenance checklist, creased and annotated. He hadn't meant to bring it through security. Old habit. The supervisor scoffed at the sight, mistaking it for another excuse. "Sir, step back," she said, louder now. Authority needed volume when respect wasn't automatic. He did step back, just far enough to see the full bank of monitors, just far enough to confirm what his instincts had already flagged. Something was off. Not dangerous yet, not obvious, but trending the wrong way. A warning tone sounded, brief, easily dismissed. The supervisor dismissed it. She was already preparing to escalate him out of the area, to call this encounter done. Around them, travelers shifted, annoyed, restless. Evan exhaled slowly. He'd learned a long time ago that the worst failures started like this, small, ignored, wrapped in ego. He looked down at his daughter again, then back at the supervisor. "I need you to pause the lane," he said quietly. That was when she laughed outright. The laugh lingered longer than it should have, drawing a few more smiles from the line as if the moment had turned into shared entertainment. Maren Holt straightened her jacket, satisfied with the way attention bent toward her. She gestured again, sharper this time, signaling for an officer to move closer. The officer hesitated, eyes flicking between the supervisor and the blinking monitor overhead, then followed the command anyway. The single dad didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. That seemed to irritate her more than shouting would have. And people like her understood resistance when it looked like defiance, not when it looked like restraint. She leaned in slightly, lowering her tone in a way meant to sound reasonable while still cutting. Rules existed for a reason. Exceptions created chaos. If she bent now, she'd be bending forever. Behind them, the expedited lane hummed smoothly. Shoes stayed on. Belts stayed buckled. A man in a tailored coat checked his watch and sighed loudly, as if the delay offended him personally. The contrast was obvious, even if no one said it aloud. Some people were meant to pass through frictionless. Others were meant to be slowed until they learned their place. The child shifted again, fingers tightening around the stuffed rabbit. The medical tag brushed the father's wrist, grounding him. He crouched just enough to meet her eyes, blocking out the supervisor for a heartbeat. His voice stayed calm, steady, the kind of tone that didn't promise miracles but never lied either. She nodded, trusting him without needing to understand why. When he stood, the officer nearest him noticed the change. Not aggression. Focus, like someone stepping into a task instead of a confrontation. The officer cleared his throat, glanced back at Maren. "Ma'am, lane 3's throwing another delay." Maren didn't turn. "It'll clear," she said. Authority spoken like fact. It didn't clear. Another alert chimed, then another, stacking like mismatched beats in a song gone wrong. Travelers murmured, shoes scuffed. A ripple of irritation moved outward. Maren finally looked up, annoyance flashing across her face as she tapped her earpiece, murmuring for confirmation. Control was slipping in small, irritating increments. The father watched the screens without staring. He recognized the pattern now, clear as daylight. Not catastrophic yet, but heading there. He shifted his weight, positioning himself so he could see the auxiliary indicators reflected in the glass. Years ago, he'd learned how reflections could tell you what direct access couldn't. Maren noticed the movement. "Sir, you need to stay where you are," she snapped. "You don't have clearance to be monitoring anything." He stopped moving, met her gaze. "Then you should shut the lane," he said evenly, "because it's about to cascade." The word landed wrong. Too technical, too confident. A few heads turned again, curiosity edging out mockery. Maren bristled. She hated being challenged in front of an audience, especially by someone she'd already categorized. "We're not taking advice from passengers," she said, "especially ones who won't comply." The officer beside her shifted again, uncomfortable now. Another lane slowed. A child somewhere began to cry. The noise level rose, pressure building like static. Maren lifted her chin, preparing to escalate, to call for removal, to end this irritation decisively. That was when the red phone, silent for months, vibrated once on its cradle. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The vibration carried weight. The officer nearest it froze. Maren's eyes flicked toward it despite herself. For a split second, uncertainty cracked her composure. She masked it quickly, turning back to the father as if daring the phone to interrupt her authority. It vibrated again. A murmur spread. Even the impatient man in the tailored coat went quiet. Marin reached for the phone, jaw tight, aware now of how many eyes were on her. She answered, posture stiff, voice clipped. As she listened, color drained from her face in increments, each second erasing a layer of confidence. Her gaze slid back to the man she'd laughed at, then to the monitors, then back again. The officer leaned closer, catching fragments, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief. The father didn't move. He didn't smile. He simply rested a hand on his daughter's shoulder, grounding himself in the one thing that mattered more than being right. If you're still watching, subscribe so you don't miss how this turns, because moments like this don't end the way you expect. Marin lowered the phone slowly. The terminal seemed to hold its breath. She swallowed, then spoke again, quieter now, careful. "Sir," she said, "we need to talk." The space between them shifted the moment she said it. Not softened, not repaired, just altered, like a floor panel that no longer sat flush. The people in line felt it too, even if they couldn't name it. Conversation stalled, shoes stopped shuffling. The airport's constant noise dulled into a waiting hush. He didn't answer right away. He glanced down at his daughter, brushing his thumb against the edge of the medical tag clipped to her sleeve. Her breathing was faster now, shallow in that way he recognized instantly. Stress did that to her. Enclosed spaces, raised voices, the feeling of being watched. He adjusted his stance, angling his body just enough to shield her from the crowd. Marin Holt cleared her throat. "Sir," she repeated, firmer, as if authority could be reclaimed by cadence alone. "Step with me." This time, she didn't point. She waited. He followed, not toward the public desk where power liked to perform, but toward a narrow corridor marked "Staff Only." It was the kind of place travelers never noticed unless they were being escorted somewhere they didn't want to go. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The air smelled faintly of metal and cleaning solvent. An officer walked a few steps behind them, uncertain whether this was an escort or a negotiation. Marin kept her back straight, shoulders tight, heels clicking sharply against the floor. She hadn't apologized. She hadn't explained. She didn't need to. Not yet. But the laughter was gone, replaced by calculation. They stopped near a wall of auxiliary panels, their surfaces worn smooth by years of maintenance hands. The sounds of the terminal filtered through the walls in muffled layers. Marin turned, lowering her voice. "You're causing a disruption," she said. "And now my superiors are asking questions." He nodded once. "Because the system's desyncing," he replied. "Lane 3's throwing false positives, Lane 5's lagging, and your primary controller isn't compensating." Her eyes narrowed. "You shouldn't know that." "I shouldn't," he agreed. The officer inhaled sharply, then looked away, suddenly very interested in the scuffed floor. Marin crossed her arms, defensive now. "You're still a passenger without ID," she said. "Whatever you think you're seeing doesn't change that." "It changes what happens next," he said calmly. "If you don't pause intake, you're going to lock yourselves into a full protocol reset, and that'll shut this terminal down for at least an hour." She scoffed, but the sound lacked conviction. "And you know this how?" He didn't answer immediately. He reached into his jacket again, slower this time, deliberate. Marin tensed, hand lifting slightly as if to stop him. He pulled out the folded paper from before and smoothed it against the panel. Not an ID, not credentials, just a checklist, handwritten notes lining the margins, dates scribbled in the corner. "Because I've seen this failure mode," he said, more than once. She glanced at the paper, then back at his face, searching for something she could categorize. Con artist, hacker, overconfident amateur, none of it fit. He wasn't trying to impress her. He wasn't asking permission. He was stating an outcome. Behind them, a warning tone sounded again, sharper this time. The officer's radio crackled with overlapping voices. Another lane had stalled completely. Marin's jaw tightened. Pride warred with pressure. She was used to command, to clear hierarchies, to situations where authority solved uncertainty by force. This wasn't one of those situations, and she hated that she knew it. "What do you want?" she asked finally. "To get my daughter through safely," he said without hesitation, "and to keep your system from spiraling." She stared at him, then glanced down the corridor toward the terminal beyond. Too many people, too many witnesses. If she ignored him and he was right, the fallout would be undeniable. If she listened and he was wrong, she'd look weak. Her earpiece crackled again. A voice, tight with urgency, asked for a status update. She hesitated, then pressed the button. "Stand by," she said. "I'm assessing." The word tasted strange in her mouth. She looked back at him, voice lower now. "You fix this," she said. Not quite a challenge, not quite a plea. "And then we revisit your situation." "That's fine," he replied. "But we don't have long." She motioned toward the panel reluctantly. "What do you need?" He stepped closer, eyes scanning the indicators. His fingers hovered, not touching yet, as if mapping the system in his head first. He noticed the mismatched timestamps, the feedback loop no one else had flagged, the subtle drift that came from a firmware update layered over old hardware. He exhaled. "You've got a handshake failure between your biometric readers and the central controller," he said. "It's bouncing traffic instead of smoothing it." Marin swallowed. The officer's eyes widened. "You shut lane 3 and reroute intake," he continued. "Now, before it propagates." She hesitated for half a second. Then she nodded once, sharp and decisive, and barked the order into her radio. As the command went out, the noise beyond the wall shifted. Confusion, then movement. The system didn't collapse. It steadied, just slightly. He closed his eyes briefly, feeling the tension in his shoulders ease a fraction. This wasn't over, but the worst part had been stopped. For the first time since the checkpoint, Marin Holt looked at him not as a problem, but as a variable she hadn't accounted for. The terminal noise surged and settled like a restless animal that had decided, for now, not to attack. Lane 3 went dark. Officers redirected travelers with clipped instructions, their voices tight but controlled. Confusion rippled outward, but the feared cascade didn't arrive. Not yet. Marin watched the monitors as if they might contradict what had just happened. They didn't. The alerts stabilized, blinking slower, less urgent. Around them, the corridor felt smaller, charged with something neither authority nor protocol could fully explain. She turned to him again, studying his face more carefully this time. The worn jacket, the scuffed boots, the calm that hadn't cracked even when she'd laughed. None of it lined up with the clarity of what he'd just diagnosed. "You said you've seen this before," she said. Her tone had shifted, still guarded, but no longer dismissive. "Where?" He didn't answer right away. He crouched again, eye level with his daughter, checking her breathing, brushing a loose strand of hair from her forehead. She nodded when he asked silently if she was okay, though the rabbit's ear was twisted tight in her fist. Only then did he straighten. "Different systems," he said. "Same logic." "That's not an answer," Marin replied. "It's the one you need right now." Her lips pressed into a thin line. She was used to extracting compliance, not navigating ambiguity. Still, she gestured toward the panel. What else? He stepped fully into the space now, no longer hovering at the edge. His presence felt natural there, like a wrench set back into its proper slot. He traced the wiring path with his eyes, followed the logic through layers of hardware and software that most people never thought about once they passed through security. You've got a firmware patch compensating for hardware that should have been replaced 2 cycles ago, he said. It's masking latency until traffic spikes. When it does, the system can't decide which reader to trust. The officer behind them let out a low breath. That actually lines up with the service logs. Marin shot him a look, then back at the man. You've read our logs now too? He shook his head. Don't need to. Another alert chimed, then faded. The system was holding, but it was strained, like a muscle kept taut for too long. He could feel it, the way you felt vibration through a deck plate before anything visibly failed. If you keep intake rerouted without addressing the root, he said, you'll buy maybe 20 minutes. After that, you're back where you started. Marin's radio crackled again. A voice from operations asked if the disruption was contained. She hesitated, then answered honestly. Temporarily. Her finger hovered over the transmit button after she released it, as if unsure whether she'd just admitted weakness or demonstrated control. She lowered her hand slowly. What's the fix? She asked. He glanced at the clock mounted above the panel. Time mattered. His daughter shifted again, fatigue creeping into her posture. He felt it like a weight against his spine. You isolate the affected readers, he said. Run them on fallback logic until traffic drops. Then you roll back the patch and flag the hardware for replacement. Marin frowned. That's not standard procedure. No, he agreed, but it works. And you're confident? She pressed. He met her gaze. Enough to stand here while you do it. That landed. Confidence was easy when you could walk away from the consequences. Standing in the blast radius was something else entirely. She took a breath, squared her shoulders, and keyed her radio again. Orders went out. Precise, clipped. Officers responded with a speed that surprised even her. The system groaned, then adjusted, shedding load like a ship trimming ballast. The monitors steadied further. Alerts cleared one by one. The officer behind them let out a quiet, disbelieving laugh. Marin didn't smile. She watched the man instead, eyes sharp, recalibrating. You're not just guessing, she said. No, he replied. Then you're not just a passenger. He didn't correct her. He glanced toward the corridor opening, where the terminal buzzed with controlled chaos. Travelers moved again, slower now, but moving. The line that had laughed earlier had thinned, attention pulled elsewhere by inconvenience and relief. His daughter tugged gently at his sleeve. He looked down, heart tightening. She was tired, pale, holding it together the way she always did, because she trusted him to handle the rest. Marin followed his gaze. For the first time, her expression softened, not enough to erase what had happened, but enough to acknowledge it. We're stabilizing, she said. You'll be escorted through once we confirm. That's fine, he said. But if it spikes again, you call me back. Call you? She echoed. You planning on staying? He almost smiled. I'm already here. Another voice came through her earpiece, lower, more authoritative. She listened, eyes flicking to him again. This time, there was no laughter in them. Only curiosity, and something like unease. Yes, she said into the mic. He's with me now. She ended the transmission and looked at him fully. My superiors want to know who you are, she said. Formally? He nodded once. They can wait a minute. Marin hesitated, then nodded back, surprising herself. Outside the corridor, the terminal exhaled. Inside it, the balance of power continued to shift, quietly, irrevocably. The minute stretched longer than either of them expected. The systems held, but only just, humming with the strained steadiness of something being forced to behave. The corridor felt warmer now, air thick with the aftermath of near failure. Somewhere beyond the wall, an announcement crackled over the terminal speakers, explaining delays in the careful language designed to sound reassuring without promising anything. Marin stayed still, arms crossed, eyes flicking between the monitors and the man beside her. Authority hadn't left her, but it had shifted. It no longer stood in front of her like a shield. It hovered behind her, asking questions she wasn't ready to answer. Her earpiece chimed again. She listened in silence this time, letting the voice on the other end speak longer than she liked. Her jaw tightened, then relaxed, then tightened again. When she finally responded, her tone was measured, controlled, unmistakably cautious. "Yes, I understand. He's contained. No, he hasn't accessed anything directly. Yes, I'll update you." She lowered her hand and exhaled through her nose. "They're escalating," she said, "which means if this goes sideways, it lands on me." He nodded. "That's usually how it works." She shot him a look, irritation flaring briefly. "You don't seem concerned." "I am," he replied, "just not about the same things." Before she could ask, a sharp chirp cut through the corridor. One of the auxiliary indicators blinked amber, then red, then amber again. Not a full alert, a warning, the kind that preceded bigger problems if ignored. He stepped closer to the panel, instinct taking over. His fingers hovered again, tracing invisible lines through circuitry and code. "There," he said quietly. "Your rollbacks fighting cached credentials." Marin frowned. "That shouldn't—" "It does," he interrupted gently. "Because the patch changed validation timing, the system's double-checking itself." The officer behind them leaned in despite himself. "Can you fix it?" He shook his head once. "Not directly, but I can tell you how to let it fix itself." Marin hesitated. This was the line. In the moment where procedure either bent or snapped, she glanced toward the corridor opening again, where an airport operations manager now hovered, clearly trying not to look like he was eavesdropping. Too many eyes, too much at stake. "Talk," she said. "Clear the cache manually on the affected readers," he replied. "Stagger it, 30-second intervals. If you do them all at once, you'll spike load again." "That's not in our playbook," she said. "It's in mine." She studied him, really studied him, as if searching for the outline of the person who could speak like that without bluster. Whatever she saw made her decision for her. She raised her radio and issued the order, voice steady, no room for debate. The next 2 minutes passed in near silence. Indicators flickered, then stabilized. The amber light vanished. The system settled into a smoother rhythm, like breathing evening out after a sprint. The officer let out a breath he'd clearly been holding. "It worked." Marin didn't look away from the panel. "It's holding," she corrected. Then quietly, "Good call." The words surprised both of them. A ripple of movement echoed from the terminal beyond as lanes reopened in stages. The tension that had gripped the space loosened, replaced by a low murmur of resumed travel. The crisis, at least this part of it, had passed. He stepped back, rolling his shoulders slightly, fatigue creeping in now that the immediate pressure had lifted. His daughter leaned against his leg, eyes heavy. He bent, scooped her up carefully, feeling the familiar ache in his arms and the familiar resolve in his chest. Marin watched the gesture, something unspoken shifting behind her eyes. She cleared her throat. "Operations is sending someone down," she said. "Senior level." He nodded. "Figured." "They'll want statements," she added. "Credentials, explanations." "Also figured." She hesitated, then said, "For what it's worth, I misjudged you." He met her gaze, expression neutral. "For what it's worth," he replied, "you're doing better now." The operations manager finally stepped into the corridor, flanked by another official in a suit that didn't belong anywhere near wiring panels. Their eyes went immediately to him, then to Marin, then back again. The shift was subtle, but unmistakable. The undercurrent of assumption had changed. As they approached, the red phone vibrated once more on the desk behind Marin, then went still. No one laughed this time. "If you're still here, make sure you're subscribed, because what happens next isn't just about fixing a system, it's about who gets believed when things go wrong." Marin straightened as the official stopped in front of them. "This is the individual I told you about," she said. Her voice was professional, but there was no dismissal in it now. He adjusted his grip on his daughter, feeling the weight of the moment settle in. The technical crisis had revealed something larger, something harder to reset than a security system. The officials exchanged a look. One of them nodded slowly. "Sir," he said, "we need to ask you a few questions." He held their gaze, calm as ever. "Go ahead." Behind them, the terminal flowed again, unaware of how close it had come to grinding to a halt. And in that narrow corridor, surrounded by panels and power symbols meant for others, the balance continued to tilt, one quiet acknowledgement at a time. The operations manager introduced himself with a clipped nod, posture tight with urgency rather than ego. The suited official beside him stayed half a step back, eyes already scanning panels, people, exits. Neither of them spoke at first. They were listening, to the hum of stabilized systems, to the quiet that followed averted disaster. Marin gestured toward the panels. "We had a cascading failure risk," she said. "He identified it. He guided the mitigation." The manager's eyebrows lifted slightly. "You're saying a passenger intervened?" He answered before Marin could. "I advised. Your team executed." The correction mattered. The officer nearby noticed it. So did the suited official, whose gaze sharpened, reassessing tone as much as facts. "What's your background?" the manager asked. He glanced down at his daughter, shifting her weight so she rested more comfortably against his shoulder. "Avionics," he said. "Engineering, systems integration." The suited official's pen paused midair. "Where?" He hesitated, not because he couldn't answer, but because answers carried consequences. The terminal noise pressed in again as a backdrop, a reminder that this conversation existed in public space, however narrow the corridor. "Air Force," he said finally. "Former." Silence followed, heavy and immediate. It wasn't reverence, it was recalculation. The manager's shoulders eased a fraction. The suited official straightened. Marin felt it too, the shift she could no longer control. Authority didn't vanish. It redistributed. "Do you have identification?" the manager asked. Professional, but cautious. "Not on me," he replied. "Reported stolen yesterday." The manager nodded, accepting it without commentary. "We can verify." "You already did," he said calmly, when the red phone rang. That landed harder than any credential. The suited official's eyes flicked to Marin, then back. "He's right," he said. "We cross-checked clearance status when the anomaly flagged." Marin stiffened. She hadn't known that detail, not fully. The laughter from earlier echoed in her memory, sharp and misplaced. The manager looked at her. Why wasn't he expedited immediately? Maren inhaled slowly. This was the moment she'd feared. The one where public exposure didn't come with spectacle, just consequence. "Because I followed procedure," she said, "and I made assumptions." The manager held her gaze, then nodded once. "Understood." He turned back to the father. "You prevented a shutdown," he said. "That affects thousands of travelers." "I prevented a spike," he corrected. "Your team did the rest." The suited official scribbled, then paused. "Your clearance status," he said, "was never fully sunset. You're still flagged as consult capable in certain scenarios." "That's news to me," he replied. "It won't be after today." A low announcement rolled through the terminal, confirming delays were resolving. Applause broke out somewhere distant, scattered, confused, but real. Someone had seen enough to feel relief, even if they didn't know why. The manager glanced toward the sound, then back. "We're going to escort you through," he said. "Immediately." Maren nodded, stepping aside without being asked. The corridor felt different now, less like containment, more like passage. As they moved, officers along the way straightened, curiosity flickering across the faces that had earlier held amusement. Word traveled fast in places like this, not in details, but in tone. Something important had happened. Someone important had been overlooked. At the checkpoint, the line had reformed. Travelers glanced up as he approached, some recognizing him, others sensing significance without context. The supervisor who'd laughed earlier kept her eyes forward, jaw tight. The manager addressed the nearest officer. "Process them," he said. "No qualifiers." The officer nodded, efficient, respectful. Shoes stayed on. Bags passed through. The medical tag was acknowledged without fuss. His daughter relaxed against him, tension draining in small increments. Maren stood back, watching. When his gaze met hers, she didn't look away. She nodded once, a restrained acknowledgement that carried weight because it cost her something. They cleared the checkpoint in moments. On the other side, the manager stopped him. "We'll need a formal report," he said. "And your contact information." He nodded. "I'll cooperate." The suited official added, "And for what it's worth, thank you." He adjusted the backpack on his shoulder, grounding himself in routine. "Just doing what I know how to do." As they walked toward the gate, the terminal noise swelled again, normalizing. But the looks followed him now, no laughter, no dismissal. Recognition, incomplete but sincere. Behind them, Maren exhaled slowly, the sound of someone recalibrating her own system. Public exposure hadn't humiliated her. It had corrected her. Ahead, the gate agent waved them forward. Boarding was underway. His daughter stirred, eyes opening briefly, then closing again as he held her close. The airport moved on, but the memory wouldn't. Not for those who'd laughed. Not for those who'd watched power shift without a word raised. And not for the man who'd stood where power never looked and been seen anyway. The jet bridge hummed beneath his feet as he stepped forward with the slow, careful rhythm of someone carrying more than just weight. His daughter slept now, cheek pressed against his shoulder, breath warm through the fabric of his jacket. The adrenaline that had held him upright began to ebb, leaving behind the familiar ache in his lower back and the dull throb behind his eyes that always followed long stretches of control. Behind them, the checkpoint noise faded into abstraction. Ahead, the gate area pulsed with orderly motion. Boarding groups called, carry-ons lifted, wheels rattling across the floor. Normalcy reassembled quickly, as if nothing unusual had happened at all. But something had happened. He could feel it in the way people looked at him now, not staring, not whispering. Just that half-second pause of recognition, like they'd glimpsed a story without hearing the whole thing. The gate agent scanned their passes without comment, then glanced up at his daughter and softened. "You're all set," she said gently. "No questions, no suspicion." He nodded in thanks and moved on. As he entered the aircraft, the smell of recycled air and coffee wrapped around him, familiar and oddly grounding. He maneuvered down the aisle carefully, murmuring apologies as he brushed past knees and elbows. A flight attendant stepped in smoothly, gesturing toward an open seat near the bulkhead. "You can sit there," she said quietly. "More room." He hesitated, instinctively wary of accommodations that came with invisible strings, then accepted with a nod. He settled in, easing his daughter into the seat beside him, arranging her blanket with practiced care. She sighed in her sleep, body relaxing fully for the first time since they'd entered the terminal. Only then did he let himself lean back. The cabin filled around them, the low murmur of conversations blending into white noise. He closed his eyes briefly, letting the hum of the aircraft steady his breathing. For a moment, he thought about the corridor, the panels, the way Maren Holt's laughter had cut through the space before everything shifted. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt tired. A movement near the front of the cabin drew his attention. The operations manager stepped on board, scanning the rows until his eyes found him. He approached without ceremony, crouching slightly to keep his voice low. "They've stabilized the system," he said. "Your assessment held." He nodded once. "Good." The manager hesitated, then added, "We documented the incident, including the initial interaction." "That wasn't necessary," he replied. "It was," the manager said evenly. "Transparency matters." He studied the man for a moment, then looked away. "What happens now?" "For you," the manager straightened slightly. "You fly. For us, there will be reviews." He didn't ask for details. He didn't need them. He knew how institutions corrected themselves, slowly, unevenly, usually after being forced to look in a mirror they'd been avoiding. The manager glanced at the sleeping child. "You did the right thing," he said, "not just technically." He inclined his head, acknowledgement without ceremony. The manager moved on, leaving the aisle to fill again with passengers and overhead bins. As the doors closed, the aircraft grew quieter, sealed off from the terminal's endless motion. Safety announcements began, voices practiced and calm. He listened with half an ear, attention drifting inward. He thought about how close it had come. Not the system failure, that had been manageable. The real danger had been simpler, sharper, being dismissed at the wrong moment, being turned away because it was easier than listening. That kind of failure didn't trigger alarms. It just accumulated damage over time. A faint vibration ran through the plane as ground crew finished their work. The engines began their low, anticipatory whine. He felt it through the floor, through the seat, a language his body still understood instinctively. His daughter stirred, blinking up at him. "We okay?" she murmured, voice thick with sleep. "We're okay," he said softly. "You did great." She smiled faintly, then curled back in on herself, reassured. As the plane pushed back from the gate, he caught sight of the terminal through the window, glass and steel, lights blinking in coded rhythms. Somewhere inside, Maren Holt was likely filing reports, replaying moments, recalibrating her own understanding of authority and error. He didn't hate her, he never had. He'd learned long ago that systems taught people how to behave, then punished them for following those lessons too well. The aircraft turned, aligning with the runway. Acceleration pressed him gently into the seat, a familiar force that felt almost comforting. As they lifted, the terminal fell away, shrinking into abstraction. He rested his head back, eyes open, watching the clouds gather beneath them. He didn't know what would come of the documentation, the reviews, the quiet ripple effects already spreading through the airport's hierarchy. What he did know was this: his daughter was safe. The flight was airborne. And somewhere behind them, a system had been forced to acknowledge a truth it preferred to ignore: that sometimes the most qualified person in the room is the one everyone laughed at first. The seatbelt sign stayed on longer than usual, a reminder that even smooth departures carried unseen adjustments. He watched the cabin settle, listening to the small sounds people made when they believed the hard part was over: bags rustling, screens flicking on, murmured conversations resuming. His daughter leaned against him, awake now, tracing the seam of the armrest with one finger. "You fixed it," she said quietly, not a question. He smiled faintly. "A lot of people fixed it." She considered that, then nodded, satisfied. She'd grown up around systems, medical, mechanical, human, and understood instinctively that no single person ever held everything together alone. A flight attendant passed, offering water. He accepted, careful not to jostle her. As he drank, his phone vibrated for the first time since the checkpoint. No signal before, then suddenly a flood. Missed calls, messages stacked in quiet urgency. One number repeated, unfamiliar but persistent. He didn't answer yet. He knew the timing. Let the plane level off. Let the noise thin. Let decisions arrive when adrenaline wasn't driving them. Across the aisle, a man leaned forward, curiosity finally breaking through restraint. "Excuse me," he said, hesitant. "Were you part of that thing at security?" He met the man's eyes, measured the intent, and nodded once. "I helped." "That was you?" The man breathed. "They said the whole terminal almost—" He stopped himself, shaking his head. "Anyway, thank you." The gratitude was awkward, sincere, unpolished. He accepted it with a small nod, then looked away, not interested in becoming a story passed down the cabin. The plane leveled off. The seatbelt sign chimed off. He reached into his jacket pocket and finally checked the messages. One stood out. Short, precise, from a government domain he hadn't seen in years. "We need to update your consult status. Call when able." He exhaled slowly. There it was, the quiet aftershock. Fixing the system had never been the end. It was an opening. His daughter watched his face. "Is it bad?" "No," he said honestly, "just complicated." She grinned. "You're good at complicated." He laughed softly despite himself. When he called the number, he kept his voice low. The person on the other end didn't waste time. They thanked him. They confirmed what he already knew, that his prior clearance, dormant but not erased, had flagged automatically when the anomaly hit certain thresholds. The red phone hadn't rung because of who he was. It rang because of what he knew how to do. "We'd like to formalize things," the voice said. "Consult basis, remote when possible." He looked at his daughter, at the way the cabin light caught the edge of her blanket. "I'm not relocating," he said. "That won't be necessary." He listened, asked a few questions, clarified boundaries. When he ended the call, the knot in his chest loosened slightly. Options mattered. Control mattered. Across the aisle, the curious man caught his eye again and gave a small thumbs up, as if they now shared a secret. He returned the gesture politely, then turned back to his daughter. "You hungry?" he asked. She nodded enthusiastically. As he flagged the attendant, he thought about the corridor again. Not the panels or the alerts, but the look on Maren Holt's face when authority had failed her, and adaptation had saved her. That moment mattered more than any report. It was the moment preparation began. not just for systems, but for people. If you're still with us, make sure you're subscribed, because the next shift isn't loud, it's strategic. The food arrived. He helped his daughter open the tray, watching her appetite return. Normal rhythms reasserted themselves, and with them, space to think. The documentation, the reviews, the quiet emails that would follow, none of it would be immediate. Institutions moved slowly after being startled, but they did move. He drafted a short note on his phone, outlining the failure mode they'd encountered and the interim safeguards that should be standardized. Not a report, a roadmap. He sent it to the contact who'd called, then set the phone down. The plane cruised steadily now, sunlight breaking through the clouds in long, clean bands. He felt the exhaustion settle deeper, but beneath it ran something steadier than adrenaline: resolve. Whatever came next wouldn't be about proving anything. It would be about preventing the next laugh, the next dismissal that carried consequences people never saw until it was too late. His daughter finished her meal and leaned back, content. "Can we watch something?" "Sure," he said, pulling up the screen. As the cabin dimmed slightly and the flight settled into its long arc, he allowed himself one final look out the window. Somewhere below, systems hummed, people moved, and authority assumed it understood the world it governed. He knew better now. And soon, quietly, so would they. The cabin lights dimmed further as the flight settled into its cruise altitude, the steady drone of engines becoming a background constant. He adjusted the blanket over his daughter, careful not to wake her as her breathing evened out again. With the immediate urgency gone, his thoughts had space to roam, and they kept circling back to the same truth. The crisis wasn't over, it had simply changed shape. He reopened the note he'd sent earlier, rereading the clean, technical language. No emotion, no blame, just cause and effect. That was how systems learned, if they learned at all. He added a final line, something about training protocols for frontline supervisors, then stopped, fingers hovering. He deleted it. That part wasn't his to dictate. Not yet. Across the aisle, the curious man had fallen asleep, head tilted awkwardly against the window. The rest of the cabin had found its rhythm, the quiet intimacy of strangers sharing air and time. He let himself sink into the seat, closing his eyes briefly. Listening to the aircraft speak in vibrations and pressure shifts he still understood instinctively. When his phone buzzed again, he felt it before he heard it. Another message. This one longer. It confirmed the consult arrangement in writing, outlined compensation, expectations, boundaries. Professional, careful. It also mentioned an internal review already underway regarding public-facing conduct and escalation protocols. He read that line twice. This was the preparation phase, he realized. Not his, he was always preparing, but theirs. Institutions didn't change in moments of crisis alone. They changed afterward, when someone wrote things down, asked uncomfortable questions, and realized too many people had been watching to pretend nothing happened. His daughter stirred, eyes fluttering open. "You thinking hard again?" she murmured. He smiled. "A little. Is that okay?" "It's how I make things safer." She nodded, reassured by the answer, and rolled onto her side, drifting back to sleep. He thought about Maren Holt then, not with bitterness, but clarity. He'd seen that look before, in officers and executives and managers who realized too late that authority without understanding was brittle. She hadn't doubled down when the evidence mounted. That mattered. It didn't erase what happened, but it changed what could happen next. The plane hit a pocket of light turbulence, a brief shudder that rippled through the cabin. A few passengers gasped, then laughed at themselves when it passed. He didn't flinch. He'd learned long ago that panic rarely correlated with actual danger. Another memory surfaced uninvited. A briefing room years ago, screens lit with data. A senior officer dismissing a junior analyst's concern because it didn't fit the model. The failure that followed had cost more than pride. He pushed the memory aside, focusing on the present. Preparation, he reminded himself, wasn't about revenge. It was about resilience. He opened a new note, this one personal, a list, not tasks but principles, things he'd learned the hard way. Listen first, watch patterns, not noise, never assume calm means ignorance. He stopped after the third line, feeling the weight of it settle. The flight attendant passed again, checking seat belts, offering a quiet smile when she saw his daughter asleep. "Let me know if you need anything," she whispered. "Thank you," he replied. As the hours stretched on, the cabin lights shifted subtly to mimic dusk. Outside, the sky deepened into layered blues and grays. He felt the fatigue fully now, heavy but earned, the kind that came after doing exactly what was required and nothing more. His phone buzzed one last time. A short message from the operations manager at the airport. "Reviews are moving fast. Just wanted you to know." He considered replying, then typed simply, "Appreciate the update. Glad it stabilized." He set the phone aside and rested his head back, eyes open, watching the ceiling panels glow softly. Somewhere below them, the airport continued its endless cycle, systems humming, people moving, authority reasserting itself in familiar patterns. But there would be a difference now. Small at first. A training module adjusted. A supervisor reminded to pause before laughing. A red phone taken a little more seriously. That was how change really happened. Not with applause, but with preparation layered quietly over time. As the aircraft began its gradual descent, he felt the familiar shift in pressure, the subtle cue that another transition was underway. He straightened slightly, instinct kicking in, checking on his daughter as she stirred awake again. "We landing?" she asked sleepily. "Soon," he said. "You did great today." She smiled, proud, without fully knowing why. The plane banked gently, lights from the city rising to meet them. He looked out the window, watching the grid sharpen into detail. Somewhere down there, more systems waited, more people, more moments where someone would be judged too quickly. He couldn't be everywhere, he knew that. But he could be ready when it mattered. And sometimes, that readiness was enough to tilt the balance before anyone else realized it was even in play. The wheels touched down with a muted thump, the cabin filling with the familiar sounds of arrival. As reverse thrust roared and the aircraft slowed, he felt the long arc of the day close, not with finality, but with intention. This wasn't the end of the story, it was the setup. The aircraft rolled to the gate with a tired shudder, metal settling into stillness as the engines wound down. Applause rippled briefly through the cabin, less for the landing than for the release of hours spent contained. He waited, patient as ever, letting the aisle clear before standing. His daughter stretched, blinking up at the overhead bins as if waking in a new place. "Okay," she said softly. "Now what?" "Now we walk," he replied. Simple answers mattered after long days. As they stepped into the jet bridge, the air changed, cooler, sharper, carrying the faint scent of fuel and rain. He adjusted the backpack, lifted his daughter again when the crowd thickened, instinctively placing himself between her and the press of bodies. The terminal opened up ahead, bright and busy, the familiar choreography of arrival unfolding. What he didn't expect was the pause. Just beyond the gate, 2 airport officials stood waiting, not blocking, but unmistakably positioned. One wore operations insignia. The other carried a slim tablet and the posture of someone used to documenting outcomes. Travelers flowed around them, barely noticing, but the official's attention fixed on him immediately. "Sir," the operations official said, respectful, low-voiced. "Welcome." He nodded, slowing his pace but not stopping. "Is something wrong?" "No," the official replied quickly. "Quite the opposite. We just need a moment if you're willing." He glanced at his daughter, then back. "As long as it's brief." They stepped aside into a wide corridor bordered by glass walls overlooking the apron. Planes moved below like patient animals. The sounds of arrivals softened into a distant hum. The official gestured to a bench. He remained standing. The tablet carrier spoke this time. "We're finalizing the incident report from earlier today. There were discrepancies in how the initial interaction was handled." He waited. Silence was still his most effective tool. The operations official continued. "We're conducting immediate corrective action. That includes retraining and formal notation." "For who?" he asked evenly. The official hesitated, then answered honestly. "For the supervisor involved." He absorbed that without reaction. Consequences weren't something to savor. They were something to ensure were accurate. "And," he prompted gently. "And," the official said, "we'd like to formally acknowledge your role, publicly." There it was, the execution phase of justice, not dramatic, procedural, real. He shook his head slightly. "I'm not interested in a press moment." The tablet carrier nodded, unsurprised. "We anticipated that. The acknowledgement would be internal, but visible, documented, cited in training materials." That mattered more. He considered it, then nodded once. "That's acceptable." His daughter tugged at his collar. "Are we in trouble?" He smiled down at her. "No, we're almost done." The officials relaxed, tension easing. "There's one more thing," the operations official said. "The supervisor asked to speak with you. Briefly." He looked past them, eyes scanning the terminal. He saw her then, standing near a column, posture straight, expression controlled but strained. Not hiding, waiting. He exhaled slowly. "All right." They crossed the short distance without ceremony. Travelers passed between them, oblivious. When they stopped, neither spoke at first. The moment stretched, fragile and human. "I was wrong," Marin Holt said finally. "No qualifiers, no defense. I let authority override judgment." He met her gaze. "That happens." She swallowed. "It won't again, not like that." "I hope so," he replied. "For the next person." Her eyes flicked to his daughter, then back. "I've been removed from frontline supervision pending review," she said. "I wanted you to hear that from me." He nodded. "Thank you for telling me." They stood there, two people recalibrating after impact. And no forgiveness was requested. None was offered. Accountability didn't require absolution. An announcement echoed overhead, directing arrivals toward baggage claim. The moment had reached its natural end. "I hope your daughter's appointment goes well," Marin said quietly. He inclined his head. "Me too." He turned away then, walking toward the flow of passengers. The officials peeled off, already absorbed into follow-up tasks. The terminal resumed its rhythm, indifferent and relentless. As they moved, his phone vibrated again. A message from the consult contact confirmed next steps, timelines, non-disclosure terms. He skimmed it, then locked the screen. Later. Baggage claim smelled like coffee and impatience. Carousels rattled to life. He set his daughter down, letting her walk now, holding his hand. She skipped once, light again. "You did a big thing," she said. "We did a necessary thing," he corrected gently. She smiled, accepting the nuance without needing it explained. As their bag appeared and he lifted it free, he felt the quiet satisfaction of closure, not because he'd been proven right, but because the system had been forced to correct itself in view of witnesses. Public exposure had done its work, not with applause but with records and resolve. They headed for the exit, sunlight spilling through the glass doors ahead. Outside, rain had begun to fall, soft and steady, washing the tarmac clean. He stepped into it without hesitation, pulling his jacket tighter around his daughter, and walked on, already preparing for whatever came next. The rain followed them into the parking structure, echoing against concrete in uneven rhythms. He adjusted the strap of the duffel on his shoulder and guided his daughter toward the elevator, the day finally beginning to loosen its grip. The terminal behind them kept moving, already absorbing the incident into memory. But the weight of it hadn't vanished. It had simply settled into quieter places. Inside the elevator, fluorescent lights hummed. A family stepped in beside them, talking about baggage delays, unaware of how close the airport had come to a very different kind of interruption. He leaned back against the wall, letting the vibration of descent ground him. His daughter watched the floor numbers tick down, calm now, secure in the certainty that he had things handled. When the doors opened, the smell of damp asphalt rushed in. He crossed the garage toward the car, rain misting through the open sides, softening edges. As he unlocked the door and settled his daughter into her seat, his phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't official. It was a message from an unfamiliar internal address, brief and carefully worded. "Thank you for today. I needed the correction." M.H. He stared at the screen for a moment, then slipped the phone back into his pocket without replying. Some acknowledgments didn't require answers. They required follow-through. The drive out of the airport was slow, traffic thick with arrivals. Windshield wipers traced steady arcs as he merged onto the highway. His daughter hummed softly in the back seat, a tune she always made up when she was tired but content. The sound eased something tight in his chest. As miles passed, he replayed the day. Not the humiliation, but the moments that had mattered afterward, and the hesitation before Marin issued the order, the officer's quiet trust, the way authority had paused just long enough to let competence speak. Those were the cracks where change entered. He knew how easily it could have gone the other way. One more laugh, one more dismissal. A supervisor, too, invested in being right to notice being wrong. The system would have failed quietly, and the blame would have landed on someone without power to deflect it. That hadn't happened. Not today. They stopped at a rest area an hour later. He helped his daughter out, stretching stiff muscles, breathing in the cool air. Inside the small cafe, a television murmured with local news. He ordered something warm, something simple, letting normalcy stitch itself back together. As they sat, he checked his phone again. A longer message had come through from the consult contact, outlining expectations for the coming weeks. Virtual briefings, documentation review. No emergencies unless requested. Boundaries clearly defined. He read it carefully, then accepted. This wasn't a return to a past life. It was a controlled re-entry, shaped around the life he'd built since. Around school schedules and appointments and nights spent double-checking homework instead of schematics. The system would get his expertise. His daughter would keep his priority. When they finished eating, she looked up at him. "Are you going to fix airports now?" she asked, half joking. He smiled. "Sometimes. Mostly I'll help people avoid breaking them." She laughed, then grew serious. "They were mean. They were careless," he corrected gently. There's a difference. Did they learn? He thought about that, about Marin's message, about the reports already moving through channels. Some of them did, he said. Enough to matter. They got back in the car, the road stretching ahead in long, reflective lines. The rain eased as they drove, clouds thinning until late sunlight broke through in pale bands. He felt the fatigue return, heavier now, but clean. Hours later, as the city they called home came into view, his phone buzzed one last time. A brief notification from the airport authority confirming the internal acknowledgement had been finalized. Training updates scheduled. Documentation archived. He deleted the notification after reading it. The car turned onto familiar streets, houses lining the road like quiet sentinels. He pulled into their driveway and shut off the engine, sitting for a moment in the sudden silence. His daughter unbuckled herself and leaned forward. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For not yelling," she replied simply. "And for fixing it." He swallowed, then nodded. "You're welcome." Inside the house, routine resumed. Bags dropped, lights switched on, shoes kicked aside. The day receded into memory, but its imprint remained, subtle and durable. Later, as he tucked his daughter into bed, she asked one last question. "Will it happen again?" "Maybe," he said honestly, "but next time someone might remember today." She smiled, eyes closing. In the quiet that followed, he stood alone for a moment, listening to the house settle. The world outside kept moving, systems humming, people making choices. He knew he wouldn't always be there when authority laughed at the wrong person, but sometimes being there once was enough to change what happened the next time. Morning arrived without ceremony. Pale light filtered through the kitchen window as he poured coffee, the house still wrapped in the soft quiet that only existed before the day asserted itself. Outside, the rain had washed the air clean. Inside, the echoes of yesterday felt distant but intact, like something carefully set aside rather than forgotten. His daughter padded in, hair tangled, still wearing sleep in her eyes. She climbed onto a chair and rested her chin on the table, watching him the way she always did when she wanted to ask something but hadn't found the words yet. "They didn't laugh this morning," she said finally. He paused, mug halfway to his lips. "Who?" "The people," she replied. "At the coffee place, they just waited." He smiled faintly. "Sometimes that's progress." She accepted that answer easily, swinging her legs as she sipped her juice. Children were good at recognizing shifts adults dismissed as coincidence. They felt when the world tilted, even slightly, toward fairness. After breakfast, life resumed its ordinary rhythm. Bags packed, shoes found, a quick check of appointments. He moved through it all with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned long ago that stability wasn't passive. It was maintained. Outside, the neighborhood hummed awake, cars pulling out of driveways, doors closing, routine stitching the community together. As he walked her to the car, his phone buzzed once more. This time, there was no urgency in it. Just a quiet update from the consult team, confirming the next virtual briefing date and thanking him again for his measured response under pressure. Measured. He considered the word as he pocketed the phone. It wasn't how the moment had felt from the inside, but maybe that was the point. Control didn't need to be loud to be effective. At the clinic, he watched his daughter disappear through the door with a nurse, her stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm. He sat in the waiting room, listening to the low murmur of conversations, the distant beep of machines, the mundane reality that had always mattered more to him than titles or authority. No one there knew what had happened at the airport. No one cared. And that was fine. When the appointment ended, the doctor smiled, reassuring. Progress noted. Adjustments made. Another small win in a long series of necessary ones. He thanked them, gathered his daughter, and headed back out into the sunlight. Driving home, he passed the highway exit for the airport. For a moment, his thoughts returned there, to the corridor, the red phone, the way laughter had curdled into silence. He didn't feel anger. He felt something steadier. Resolve, tempered by realism. Institutions didn't change because one man stood his ground. They changed because moments like that were recorded, remembered, and quietly referenced the next time someone reached for arrogance instead of curiosity. Yesterday had become part of a file now, a training example, a footnote in a manual someone would skim someday. That mattered. At home, he unpacked groceries, folded laundry, answered a few emails. Life, unglamorous and relentless. In the afternoon, he logged into the consult portal, reviewed a preliminary report, and left concise comments. No grand speeches, no lectures, just clarity. Later, as the sun dipped low, his daughter sprawled on the living room floor, drawing. She held up the paper proudly. It showed a plane, a small figure holding a child's hand, and a big red phone off to the side. "That's you," she said, "and that's the phone." He laughed softly. "Is it?" She nodded. "It only rings when someone really needs help." He considered that, then nodded back. "That sounds right." As evening settled, he stood at the window, watching the sky darken. Somewhere, planes lifted and landed. Somewhere, supervisors made decisions. Somewhere, someone was being judged too quickly. He couldn't control all of it. He never had. But he could keep doing what he'd done yesterday, paying attention, staying calm, stepping forward when systems failed and people froze. That was enough. Before the day ended, he checked his phone one last time. No new messages, no emergencies, just silence, the good kind. He set the phone down and turned off the light, the house settling around him once more. Tomorrow would come with its own demands, its own quiet tests. He would meet them the same way he always had, present, prepared, unshaken. Now, I want to hear from you. What should the next story title be? Subscribe and don't miss our next story. The judge smirked at the single dad in court until a veteran in the gallery slowly stood up. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?